Welcome, family members, to this episode of Issues at Hand on Church of Uganda Family TV. Yes, things are a bit different today because we have a very special guest and a very special conversation to have this morning. My name, as always, is Bruno Edgard and Issues at Hand is proudly sponsored by Protea Hotel in Tebe. Now, you can get yourself some good relaxation, you can get yourself a wonderful time, and you can also go and find some halls which are good for conferences, especially if we want to grow this year. So please, the number is on your screen. Make a reservation and booking today when it comes to Protea Hotel Entebbe, and you will not be disappointed. Now, when it comes to places like Protea Hotel Entebbe, you can equate such places with tourism, and of course they have a wonderful they're by the lakeside, so it's a wonderful place to go and just meditate and be and enjoy serenity and calmness. So you want to make a reservation and ensure that you go and enjoy that amenities on offer. But when it comes to things like tourism, things like places that are serene, there's no one else that we can talk to who can tell us better about that than my guest for today, who is Mr. Sam Mwandah, who is the Executive Director of Uganda Wildlife Authority. And today we are going to talk about what Uganda Wildlife Authority does and why it's important that we have an agency like Uganda Wildlife Authority in Uganda. Thank you for joining us on Issues at Hand this morning.
Thank you, Edgard, for having me.
All right, my pleasure. We are always glad to have wonderful leaders like you to come on board and help us discuss certain issues. And an issue today is conserving and sustaining Uganda's wildlife. Now, for me, it's a personal honor because I am really a big fan of nature and climate and wildlife. So this is going to be a very interesting discussion. Now, let's start from the very beginning. For those of us who might have heard of Uganda Wildlife Authority but are not so sure about what Uganda Wildlife Authority does, what exactly is the mandate of Uganda Wildlife Authority?
Thank you, Edgard, and good morning, viewers. It's a pleasure for us as Uganda Wildlife Authority to be invited here at Family TV to share with you what we do and how we do it. Uganda Wildlife Authority is an agency of government. It has been set up to manage the wildlife in the country. We currently manage 10 national parks and 12 wildlife reserves, and we give guidance to management of 5 community wildlife areas. And that management comes from many years ago when we developed conservation of wildlife in Uganda. Literally, our forefathers knew how to hunt and manage wildlife, and they knew which animals to hunt. But then as the population grew, we could not sustain the hunting because the population of the wildlife dropped in number. And so it was important that certain places were set aside to manage this wildlife. And the first, through the Wildlife Preservation Act of 1926, which later also formed the Uganda National Parks Act of 1952. So we had a department that was doing what was then called game reserves, managing them, which was the game department, and the department responsible for national parks. Our first national parks were gazetted in 1952, Maction Falls and Queen Elizabeth, and then many others have been added on since. Now, because these two departments were working individually, separately, it became a challenge in terms of administration, yet they were all looking after wildlife conservation. So in 1996, the two were merged to form the Uganda Wildlife Authority. That began in 1996. We are now about 27 years in operation as one institution responsible for management of wildlife. So what we do is manage those wildlife in the protected areas I've mentioned, but also manage the wildlife that is outside. Now, in the protected areas, all plants and animals are our responsibility. When we get out of those protected areas, we look only after the wild animals, and could be elephants or buffalo, hippo, crocodile, and others. So we manage them, we work with the communities to ensure that they are appropriately protected.
Indeed. Can you name for us, because there are Ugandans out there, and something that needs to improve as far as Ugandans are concerned is our patriotism towards our wildlife, our nature, and towards things like tourism, because there are Ugandans out there who do not know that we have wonderful world-class national parks that can give us the best experiences in terms of fauna, in terms of animals as well. So can you name for us some of the national parks that the agency manages, and some of the wildlife reserves as
well? I talked of 10 national parks. They include Maction Falls, which is the largest, over 3,500 square kilometers. Queen Elizabeth. We have Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. We have Mugahinga Gorilla National Park. Then we have Lake Imburo near Mbarara National Park. Mount Elgon on the mountain, that national park. Kidepo in Karamoja. And then we have Kibale in the area of Kabarole, Kamwenge, and Semuliki National Park, which is in Bundibujo. So those are all national parks that we manage. And then wildlife reserves include Karuma, they include Bugungu, those are neighboring Maction Falls. They include Chigezi and Chambra, neighboring Queen Elizabeth. Then we have standalones like Piano Upe, south of Karamoja. It's on the border with Sebe and Bugisu, and on the other side Teso. And then we have Ajai, which is north of Pakwach. And we have Istimadi, which is in, as you hear it, Istimadi, it's near Jumani. So we have those and others. Kabuoya is another. Katonga Wildlife Reserve is another. In these parks and reserves, we have animals, a variety. You could go to Kidepo, for example. You will find there the cheetah, which is very rare for people to see. You will find elephants. You have the largest known herd of buffalo in the world in Kidepo National Park. So those are some of the animals. Then we have the mountain gorillas. We have just over 1,000 of them in the whole world, and Uganda has more than 50% of that number. And we find those in Bwindi and in Mugahinga. We have leopards all over the place. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tomorrow called me and said, there's a leopard in Kampala, because those ones really fit anywhere. And then we have lions. Lions are specific areas. They are in Kidepo, they are in Maction, they are in Queen Elizabeth. Those are the places you will find them, not anywhere else. I think we have one lion in Lake Imburo, but it's growing old and we might lose it soon. So these are places for you and I to visit and enjoy. They belong to Uganda. They are ours. We need to work together, first of all, to conserve them, but also to enjoy them, because it's important that they are our heritage. We have people like here in Uganda who are of the Mbogo clan, the others who are of the Ngabi clan. Those are animals, and so on. My own clan is a small, nice little bird.
Which bird is that?
We call it Musubo. I don't want to go into the scientific name.
Right. It's all right.
Yes.
And so on that very point that you touched on earlier about how the number, or when it comes to the wildlife, was dwindling because of hunting. And so the government realized that something needed to be done.
Yes.
On that very matter, can we go deeper into it in terms of you sharing with us why it's important that we conserve and sustain Uganda's wildlife, because there are people watching out there who might say, look, for me what's important is that I have money so that I can pay school fees, I can have food for my children and for my family. Why should I be vigilant, and why is it important to me for when it comes to conserving Uganda's wildlife?
I will mention two things, but they really are interlinked. I have already talked about our heritage, the fact that many of us have clans, and these clans have totems, and these totems are most likely a wild animal. It's either a buffalo or a lion or something. And it's important that our children who come after us can actually find that wildlife still available. That is important for you. It is important for me. It's important for Uganda. Then the other aspect that we need to look at, and it's intertwined with a lot of other things, is that there is a lot of money in wildlife conservation. And at some point before COVID began, Uganda was bringing in money through tourism that was equivalent to 1.6 billion US dollars. That was quite some money, given that our economy is not that big, because that accounted for close to 9% of our GDP. So for you and me, looking at conservation in terms of raising the finances that we need to run the country, to build roads, to do health centers, to buy medicine in our hospitals, it's important that we protect this wildlife, because that is one big issue. Because out of the taxes and the services we give, there's a lot of money around there. But linked to that is employment. If this visitor that is coming to visit Murchison Falls is coming from UK, for example, he will fly in and land in Entebbe. There are people there who are employed to handle visitors. He's paying airport tax. He's going to jump into a taxi. There is the taxi driver, there is the fuel, there is the vehicle itself, which has to be maintained. So mechanics are benefiting from this one guy who is coming. It might be small money, but when you add it up for many people, it's a lot of money. And then this taxi guy drives him to a hotel. He's eating amatoke, and he's enjoying the fruits that we have, and lots more. And then he drives all the way to Murchison and sleeps in a lodge, and we have rangers who are protecting the wildlife. We have guides who will take him on a boat trip or drive him around to see the wildlife. And by the time he comes back, we have a chain of people who have been employed, who have put food on the table, who have taken their children to school, because we have protected the elephant, because we have protected the lion. So it is important that you and I appreciate the roles that we have to play and work together to conserve. Actually, last Friday, we were recognizing the World Wildlife Day. And when we are doing it, the theme for that day was partnerships for wildlife conservation. So it is a partnership. It's you and I. It's everybody working together. And this is a Christian TV station, isn't it?
Yes.
If you're Christian like me, you should know that God is the one who created these things. And then he gave them to us in Genesis 2 and said, go and look after them. And so we should be looking after them. And I believe that even the Muslims believe similarly. So if God has given us this responsibility, who are we to say no?
Indeed, and that's a very important, and thank you for reminding us, or for telling us about that, for those of us who didn't know about why it's important to conserve wildlife. Now, And you've given us a very interesting background of where Uganda Wildlife Authority started from and its mandate. And over the years, we've seen a lot of challenges coming towards the conservation and sustainability of wildlife in Uganda, which we shall get into later on. But can you first take us through some of the notable achievements that we have seen as a result of Uganda Wildlife Authority taking its mandate to seriously as far as conserving wildlife and sustaining wildlife in Uganda is concerned?
Thank you. That's a very important point. Uganda had the biggest number of foreign visitors in East Africa in terms of tourism before 1970. After 1970, a lot of things happened, and we lost the visitors, and we started the process of killing, poaching the wildlife. And so by 1985, we had the elephant population dropped to 2,000 from over 30,000. That drop was more than, I don't know what percentage, I think like 2,000%. We have worked tirelessly over the last 30 years, and we have this number climbing, and it has reached 8,000. And we could mention lots of other animals whose numbers have grown. I talked about having 1,000 mountain gorillas in the world, but they only occur in 3 countries. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Rwanda, in Uganda. Uganda with more than 50%. That number was less than 400 30 years ago. We have raised it to over 1,000. Uganda alone having over 500 mountain gorillas. So you can see the achievement in increasing the numbers. The numbers of Uganda COB, our national on our national emblem, is higher, from about 40 to over 170,000. The buffaloes from about 20,000 to over 40,000. The giraffe from around 800 to over 2,000. And I could mention many others. So the achievements in terms of wildlife numbers has gone up. The achievement in terms of the revenue we generate coming out of tourism has gone up. I remember in 1996, when Uganda Wildlife Authority was being formed, we were collecting less than 2 billion shillings in a year. Now we collect, forget COVID. If COVID wasn't there, we would probably be in about 140 billion. But we are expecting to collect at least 90 billion this financial year, which is ending in June. And so we have improved that. We've improved the infrastructure in our parks, ensuring that our staff are appropriately accommodated, that the roads are much better managed, and we have improved the way we deal with communities. Previously, our role was to ensure that nobody stepped in the park. If you got there, you are arrested, we deal with you roughly. We've improved that. We are now engaging the communities. We are working with them. We have joint projects that we deal with them. We have been able over the last 10 years to actually share over 30 billion Uganda shillings with communities that neighbor the protected areas, because the law requires that we provide for 20% of all entry fees that goes to the communities neighboring the parks for them to implement projects of their own choice. So we work with them, they develop the projects, we provide the resources based on what we have collected. And so if we continue doing this, the communities start appreciating that actually Uganda Wildlife Authority is not just about managing the wildlife, but also improving the livelihoods of the communities. And so those are some of the achievements that we've had over the years.
Actually, interestingly, that's the next point I'd like us to get into, because when it comes to, of course, where the achievements, there are challenges, but one of the challenges, especially in light of our discussion today when it comes to conserving and sustaining Uganda's wildlife, is getting that balance right in terms of conserving wildlife, but also ensuring that the communities that live there in next to those areas that are protected are also part of the process in terms of conserving wildlife, but that they're also benefiting from the proceeds from this conservation. Now, we have seen some challenges come from that when it comes from encroachment from some of the community members, and this has become a big challenge when it comes to the issue of protecting wildlife. Now, what is the key in your experienced view of resolving this issue?
That's a very, very important question. The issue of encroachment actually is one of the achievements, in that we have greatly reduced the encroachment that has happened. What we have now is anybody who is in a national park or wildlife reserve has been there over a long period, and we are working to resolve that case. New encroachment is not tolerated, and the communities now appreciate that these areas are protected, so we are not having any new encroachments. But previously, there are people like in Chigezo Wildlife Reserve who encroached in the 70s and have formed a whole area which is a sub-county, and you don't just send them away because they have schools and clinics and so on. So what we are working on is, do we have this area degazetted? If we have it degazetted, what is the process? Or do we find a way of compensating them to get out? So that is how we deal with those.
What do you mean when you say degazetted?
Degazetted, you see, for a national park to be a national park, the matter goes before Parliament. And Parliament says we are pronouncing Queen Elizabeth as a national park, with its boundaries passing here and there as described by the Minister of Lands, which is the one that is responsible for surveying. So that the boundary is known, it is clearly mapped, and what we do is go and set up pillars where it is not a river or a lake. So we set up pillars that clearly show, like you've seen the pillars on for Uganda National Roads Authority, yes, along the roads. So we do something similar, different but similar, so that communities know where the boundary is. But there are situations where people encroached long ago, and you can't just send them away. You must find a way of compensating them. So we are systematically doing that compensation if we want them to go. If they are not to go away, then we need to go to Parliament through our Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, and say, these people have already settled here. The challenges of moving them away is that it will be costly, but also the area is degraded. It's not useful for the wildlife anymore. Can we have it carved out of this park or of this reserve? And that process, when Parliament pronounces and you cut that bit off, is called degazettement. When you're creating, you are gazetting. When you are cutting off, you're degazetting. Yes.
Indeed. And when it comes to such communities,
yes,
something that you already mentioned is the fact that these communities need to understand that their source of livelihood and their economic outlook will be more beneficial with the conservation of this wildlife. Is this
yes,
is this a message that they're understanding, or is there more that needs to be done in terms of sensitization to make them understand that, look, yes, you need more land for farming, but the idea is, in conserving this wildlife, you're going to get a very beneficial economic outlook if this tourism continues to prosper, and if the tourism can only prosper, especially if we have the wildlife.
You know, communities are a very interesting group of people. Even here in Kampala, you see when we tell borders, go and register, and because we need to train you, we need to know where you are, we need to find ways in which we can deal with you and also give you assistance. Sometimes they are opposed. So same thing with communities. So what do? As an institution, our role is to create the awareness. And if we are going to do any particular activity that relates to the communities, we must go meet them, discuss with them, sometimes negotiate with them, and reach agreement before we take action. So we have actually a dedicated department, or we call it community conservation. That dedicated department has staff who have been trained to work closely with communities. And what they do is, when we've agreed on what we need to do, we engage the communities, we discuss with them, we work with them, we get some of their leaders to be the champions of some of the actions that we are going to take. So that is one of the things that we do to engage the communities, to ensure that they are part and parcel of whatever step that we are taking. And so that is really what we do to ensure that we get their buy-in in whatever we do.
Indeed, and this is a very important issue when it comes to encroachment, because not only does it affect livelihoods, but also lives are lost. For instance, we have seen on both sides of the spectrum, because we've seen instances where humans have killed animals, and animals as well have killed humans because of that lack of a boundary, and
humans have killed humans.
Is that so?
Yes. When there is conflict, there are cases where communities have risen up and attacked our staff and killed them, and sometimes our staff, in retaliation or in trying to defend themselves, have killed communities. So it's a problem. It's a challenge. Yes.
And so you are saying that one of the key solutions is this continuous sensitization and dialogue between the Uganda Wildlife Authority and the communities.
Exactly. So we need to continue, and we continue doing so. We continue providing the information, and thanks to you, Family TV, you've brought us here. This information I'm giving, I'm sure, will help somebody to appreciate what we are doing and see the work we do in a different light. So that awareness and sensitization is a continuous process that will never stop. And we'll always have a budget specifically to ensure that we engage communities, we engage other stakeholders, so that they are aware of what we are doing and they support the activities that we do.
Actually, on that very note, not so long ago, there was a story that made the rounds. Yes. About lions that were turning up deceased in one of our national parks. Is that because of encroachment? Is there an issue because the number of lions seems to have decreased a bit? Is that because of encroachment? Is it poaching, which is another very pivotal issue, or is there something we need to do to look after our wildlife even better?
There are many reasons why the lion population has grown lower. One of them is that, as I told you, our population of other animals dropped. When the other animals, which are actually prey to the lions, the numbers drop, the lion population will follow suit. And so, but it's not immediately. So it is kind of a cycle. So that is one of the challenges. So our population of lions has unfortunately been dropping, and we need to find solutions. The other reason the lion population goes down is that the local person who goes poaching, often the majority of them don't go with spears and arrows. They go and lay a trap, a snare, which is normally wire, that an animal can fall into and it gets caught, and then this guy comes later and kills that animal. Or he will lay the trap, which actually we call it a wheel trap, that can hold the leg or even sometimes the head of an animal. So if this guy went poaching and laid a snare for Uganda kob or a snare for a hartebeest, but the lion passed by and fell into that snare, it will be caught. And because they are relatively strong, they often end up going away with the snare. But the snare is remaining on the leg. It continues tightening the leg and cuts into the arm or the leg of that lion. And many have either, and if we don't find out, unfortunately it gets an infection and it will die. If we find out, we could remove the snare and treat the wound. But sometimes the cutting is so deep that it remains three-legged because that part drops off. So we've lost many lions that way. That is another reason the numbers have dropped. The third reason the numbers have dropped is related to people who have been deceived that the paw of the lion is medicinal, that the whiskers that they have is medicinal, has medicinal properties, that this whole thing of the teeth and the bones heal certain diseases. So they have gone ahead to actually poison the lions or go and hunt them so that they can take these parts and sell them. The last one I want to bring out is the issue of the human-wildlife conflict. Lions like to hunt and eat meat. They can hunt the animals in the park, but if you have your cows and goats at the boundary, it is even easier for them. So if they come and kill your animal and you are so angry, we've had cases where farmers have poisoned because the lion will eat and goes away and sleeps and comes back to eat. By the time it comes back to eat, this angry farmer has poisoned that carcass, and the lion unfortunately will not know and eats and dies. We've lost sometimes a whole pride, whole family of lions out of this poisoning. So that is why the numbers have dropped, but we are working on ways in which to reduce on these deaths so that we have the numbers grow. Then there is another problem which is natural. Lions will bear 4-6 cubs, young ones. It is very rare that those grow because in the lion families, unfortunately, they are so jealous of each other, so that if this mother lion has babies with you, when I come and find, I will know they are not mine. I will kill them. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the lions. They want, each one wants his children, literally, to be the ones that survive in the wild. So that is part of the problem we have. So there is no guarantee, even when this lion has had these babies, that they will grow. They are sometimes killed by fellow lions. And then there are, of course, leopards and the hyenas. When the mother has gone hunting, if the leopard or hyena finds these cubs, they will also kill them. So lots of challenges in managing lions, but we think that we'll find a solution and reverse the drop in the lion numbers. It's the only wildlife species that is dropping. All the others are going up.
And something, of course, needs to be done, because something, for instance, that is unique about the lions in Uganda, especially at Queen Elizabeth National Park, is because these are lions that like residing in trees, which is not a natural habitat for many lions around the world. But on that issue, on one of the issues that has led to the drop in number of lions, and that is the issue of poaching. Why does it continue to persist in Uganda? After all these years of continuous engagement, I know that Uganda Wildlife Authority continues to try to tackle this issue, but why is it that poaching is still an issue in 2023?
Poaching is still an issue in Uganda. It is still an issue in Europe. It is still an issue in the Americas. It is still an issue everywhere. It's like a theft. We arrest people today, we take them to prison. Tomorrow when you release them, they get back to the same game. So we have that as a challenge, incidentally, because it is partly natural that people go against the law and do the wrong thing. But also because of the levels of poverty in the country, in the countryside, and because of the desire to make a quick money, people continue poaching. Because instead of raising and rearing your own goats and having them for meat, people prefer to go into the bush to go and hunt. You've heard, I don't know whether you've heard of a story of an animal called a musu. I think here in Uganda there are people who will go and hunt that thing, and it might be as many as 20 adult males, and they go and hunt and pick these small bush rats, and they are able only to capture 3, and you wonder how they will share. but it's sometimes embedded in the culture. People are just interested in the culture of going to hunt, and it's not something that you do away with in a day or even in a matter of a few years. So it will take a while. But we continue, and I said we continue providing the awareness, we continue encouraging people to try and live within their means and use what they have. We have lots of resources in the country.
Yes. On that, is this an issue that may be beyond solving for Uganda Wildlife Authority alone? Because you mentioned an issue of socio-economic problem, but you've also mentioned an issue of culture. Is this something that may be beyond Uganda Wildlife Authority, or Uganda Wildlife Authority needs to work with other stakeholders to ensure that these issues are tackled as a whole?
It is an issue that I wouldn't say it's beyond, but obviously it requires dealing with many various stakeholders. Let me tell you that we are aware even of people in Kampala, big influential people who still believe bushmeat is delicious. And I think that we will get to a point as our population grows when we will have to actually do what we call culling, which is reducing the numbers. So you hunt them, and then when you do, we should provide that meat to restaurants in Kampala so that it can be sold rather than just destroying it. So we will get to that point, but we are not yet there. But we have people who, even right now, go and entice a villager and say, you go and hunt, I'll pay you. And they pay, and they carry the meat and they eat it here in Kampala, unfortunately, because they believe it is culture and it's important that they feed on wild meat. So it's a big thing, and it requires definitely all stakeholders to work together. Uganda Wildlife Authority, working with local governments, working with NGOs, working with the media, so that the media helps us put out the information so that we all understand that poaching is not good. If we left this wildlife to grow in numbers, we would be able to harvest them properly and sustainably.
You've been telling me that, and this is something that has, for me, I'm very big on nature conservatism, and some of us like to think no one is supposed to eat any wildlife at all. But you've been telling me that no, that's not the case, that in fact, when the numbers grow, like you mentioned, we'll have to cull and ensure that this wildlife is available for consumption. Yes. And so it's not what I get from it is that it's not a bad thing. It's just that we have to be sustainable. Yes. In terms of ensuring the numbers grow so that we can enjoy it. But for now, the goal is on conserving this wildlife.
Yes, indeed, you're right. You picked that right, because wildlife is not just there for our viewing. We should utilize it because, again, if I could quote the Bible, God, when he gave man for this in the Garden of Eden, he told them, you can eat. So the wildlife that we have can be utilized as, food. But we must have the right numbers that enable us to have it sustainably, so that tomorrow we still have our elephants, tomorrow we still have our Uganda kob. So that's why we are saying, yes, it is good business. Actually, for us, we have what we call wildlife use rights. Wildlife use rights means you can use the wildlife based on the use right you have been given. And the use right can be for you to hunt, and we have some licenses for people to hunt, but for them they are hunting for what they call trophies. They want to take this head and mount it and put it in their sitting room and say, I killed that buffalo. So they pay very dearly to actually come and hunt. And because they want something big, they go for the old males normally, and those old males are no longer producing, so it is okay. So that one we allow, and we have, I think, 5 companies that are licensed to do the hunting. Then we have another use right called ranching. If you have an extensive land, 5 square kilometers and more, we can give you a license to manage wildlife on that land. And you could even bring in tourism into your area. At the moment, we don't have any with a license for that, but we are working very closely with communities that have a lot of land, neighboring protected areas around Maction Falls, Lake Imburo, Kidepo Valley, to see how they can use these as ranches, the community wildlife areas we've talked about. In Kenya, they call them conservancies. They can ranch, excuse me, and then use the wildlife for tourism. Visitors come, they pay entrance, they can be accommodated in a lodge in that area, and they benefit from it. The other use that I could talk about is farming. You have limited space, you have lots of animals, you're able to feed them, and then you can sell them either as live animals, or you can, slaughter them to produce beef for consumption. Again, we don't have many people who are doing that. What we have is, I think, 2 companies who are farming crocodiles. They are farming crocodiles, they raise them up, and then when they get to a particular age, they slaughter them and sell the skin. Crocodile skin is extremely expensive, but they sell the skin and then they're able to get money. But that could still be used as a farm that could farm Uganda kob or impala or some other animal, and that again can end up on our dining tables. And there are other uses like pets, people who want parrots. You can get a license to keep it. If I find you with a parrot or gin fowl without a license, that is illegal. He can charge you in the courts of law.
Including also those restaurants that are selling bushmeat as well without a license.
Yeah, bushmeat without a license is not allowed. That is also illegal. I think I know only one restaurant in Uganda which is licensed. It is called The Lawns. It's somewhere in Kololo. But their bushmeat is actually imported from South Africa, because the South Africans have done their business better. They are selling to them all kinds of bushmeats, and so if you go to Lawns, they'll give you a menu for wild meat. That one is legal, and there's no problem with it. Anywhere else in this country, I think it is all illegal, and we can get them arrested and prosecuted before courts of law.
Indeed, and talking about that, it's a manifestation of the continuous fight or struggle between humans and wildlife. We are seeing this conflict, and it manifests in that form, in the form of encroachment, in the form of poaching. And so the question is, how are we going to overcome this conflict? How can we get humans to see, how can we see eye to eye with this idea as human beings, as people who are living these areas, eye to eye with ensuring that we conserve wildlife?
The conflicts we have are many. The poaching, we've substantially talked about that. But there is also the other aspect. I told you the wildlife numbers have grown up. Our population in Uganda is also up, because you remember before 1970s, I think we were like 4 million only. We have now multiplied 10 times that number. It means that we need space. It means we need gardens to grow crops. And so we've cleared everything which was a habitat for wild animals. And that habitat is no longer there. You've heard of chimps now, especially in the areas of Hoima and Chibale district, that area. Chimps becoming a problem. Why? Because the forests where they used to stay have been cut. The fruits they used to live on are no longer there. What do? They start going into people's gardens, they encounter people, and there is a problem. The elephants that used to move from Maction Falls and walk all the way to South Sudan no longer can't do so. Why? Because there are barriers of gardens and farms along the way. And if they attempt, then they meet these gardens of maize and cassava, and they like to eat some of these things. And so then we have a conflict with the communities, because the wildlife we are managing has damaged their crops. So what we have done is, one, create awareness first and foremost that these animals don't know the boundaries, and so they will likely come and disturb you if you are in the area. And so we've told the people, if they come, let us know, because we know how to handle them. And so we will normally send our rangers who will then manage and send these animals back into the parks so that they are not a problem. But that is not enough. So we've done a lot of other things. We are working with the communities in various areas. We support them to acquire beehives. They put these beehives along the boundary of the park or the reserve. They will be able to get colonized with bees. With time, the communities can harvest honey. But the bees are very good, especially where elephants are a problem, in preventing the elephants from crossing, because the elephants fear bees. When they hear the buzzing of the bees, they will go away, because if it ever flies into its trunk and bites it, it is very painful. So they don't want to hear bees. When they hear the buzzing, they will go away, and that reduces the conflict. We've also in some areas dug big trenches, normally 2 meters in width and 2 meters deep, so that no animal will be able to cross. And we pile the soil on one side so that we keep the animals in that area. In Mugahinga actually refers to rocks. Mugahinga Gorilla National Park, which is the smallest national park we have in Uganda. It is in Kisoro district. It's 37 square kilometers only. That place, because it has a lot of rocks, the park has buffalo, and the buffalo sometimes come down and ravage, especially the potatoes of the farmers there. The Bafumbira grow a lot of Irish potatoes. So what we've done is we have picked those stones and piled them on the boundary to form a fence. So we have what we call a stone wall, which prevents the buffaloes from coming out. And so we have a variety of methods we use, depending on the location, but also depending on the availability of resources there. Because you can't, for example, use a stone wall in Maction Falls. There are no stones. So you need to find another thing. So recently we introduced the electric fence. We have already done, I think, 45 kilometers along Maction Falls and 56 along Queen Elizabeth, because that's where we have the biggest problem with especially elephants, and we will continue expanding it. Actually, right now we are sorting out a contract for supply of additional materials. We get the materials and then we build the fences ourselves, because our staff have been trained to do so. So we build fences, and these fences have solar power, which shocks the animal when it comes and touches the wires. And the animal, when it is shocked, interestingly, they have a mind. They know that is a bad thing. They will not come back. So they will keep away. And that helps reduce the conflicts as well. So we will continue managing these methods depending on what challenge we have, what animal are we talking about. Because you can't protect with an electric fence where monkeys are, because if they can jump across trees, they will jump and dodge the fence. So there are certain animals you can't use certain methods. But that's what we are doing at the moment. Looking at what is the problem, where, how do we address it, what are the resources available to us, so that we reduce the conflict.
Indeed. Now, unfortunately, time has caught up with us. I don't know why time usually runs past when you're having a very good conversation.
Yes.
Because there are many other challenges that we would have gotten into. And of course, that means you'll have to come back again, like the challenge of funding, which may mean dire constraints for a lot of our wildlife here in Uganda. But in closing, what would you like everyone watching Issues at Hand right now to take away when it comes to the subject of conserving and sustaining Uganda's wildlife?
Thank you, Edgar, again for having me. I think the take home for everybody is that Uganda is endowed with a lot of national heritage. Wildlife is just one of them. And this wildlife is not for Uganda Wildlife Authority as an institution, because we manage it for the benefit of the people of Uganda. And so we need to work together to ensure that the wildlife we have in Uganda is not lost, it is protected. People should come and visit and see and enjoy these protected areas. And we will continue engaging all stakeholders to ensure that the challenges that we have are dealt with. You mentioned funding quickly. Because of COVID, our funding dropped because we receive money at the gate as you enter to do your activity. Because that funding dropped, we went to government, and Ministry of Finance graciously has helped us over the last 2 years, giving us 51 billion the year before. This year it has offered to give us 38 billion, so that we're able to continue managing. We believe that going forward we should be weaned off government funding and use what we collect, and so we should be able to continue managing the wildlife better. And when you visit, you pay only 20,000 to enter any of our parks. That little money, when we collect from 1,000 of you, is some good money, and then we are able to plow it back into conservation. So we welcome you. Come and visit. Thank you.
And indeed we shall. Me personally, of course, I will, and I do, because I'm a very big fan of nature. But thank you so much for coming on Issues at Hand, Mr. Sam Mwandah, for taking us through why it's important first and foremost to conserve and sustain Uganda's wildlife, and how Uganda Wildlife Authority is doing that. And thank you as well for joining this discussion. And now we know that yes, this mandate is given to Uganda Wildlife Authority, but in extension all of us as Ugandans, because they are doing it on behalf of every citizen. So let's do our part, especially when it comes to the human wildlife conflict. Let's ensure that we make lives easier for Uganda Wildlife Authority and our wildlife out there, because their sustainability and their their enjoyment and their prosperity is our prosperity as well. And we continue to also tell you that yes, we are children of God, and we have to be good stewards of the creation that God has given to us as human beings. Thank you once again for joining us. We shall return tomorrow. For now, God richly bless you, and enjoy the rest of the programming we have today on Church of Uganda Family TV.